I'm Peter Cook. Welcome to Capital Gains, the Sunday show where we focus on the business impact of government action using the exclusive research and analysis of Bloomberg Government. We begin today by talking to one of the lawmakers in Congress trying to bridge the partisan divide. If there's a gang of bipartisan senators trying to solve tough issues, there's a pretty good chance Mark Warner is part of that group. A successful venture capitalist before turning to politics, the former Virginia governor has spent a lot of the last 6 years in the Senate reaching across the aisle in search of a budget deal, sometimes to the dismay of his fellow Democrats. If there's going to be a grand bargain this year, Warner will likely be at the center of it. Senator Warner joins me now. Senator, good to see you as always, and welcome to Capital Gains.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
Grand bargain. You've been pushing for it very hard. What are the chances right now, after this big week we've seen in the budget battle, that we're actually going to get there?
Well, the fact that we showed that we weren't going to shut down government, that we were going to take care of some of the worst parts of the sequester cuts, I think gives us a little bit of momentum going into this break coming up. And I think when the president comes back from his trip, when we come back, there's going to be about a 4-month window, and I actually would give us greater than a 50-50 chance. Remember,
you're more optimistic than some of your colleagues, even your Democratic colleagues.
Well, remember, we've done, over $2 trillion of deficit reduction, even though it's been ugly, through the Budget Control Act, through the New Year's Eve deals, through some of the other agreements along the way. We've got about $2 trillion more to do. That has to be phased in over 10 years. Revenues, entitlement reforms, smarter cuts. If we can't get that done, then shame on us.
Is it going to go through the regular order, this idea that Paul Ryan and his plan in the House and Patty Murray and her plan in the Senate, that the two of them, the budget committees, the conference committees, can sit together and work out the differences that have eluded John Boehner and President Obama?
Well, the fact that we've actually got two budgets from both bodies now out is at least a step in the right direction. So regular order is working. We're going to have 2 or 3 different paths. We'll have that path. We'll have the path that's going on the Finance Committee and the Ways and Means Committee around tax reform. And then there'll be the group of us as well who have been advocating for this grand bargain, bipartisan, in the Senate, having another.
This is the Gang of Eight's moment?
Well, I'm not sure whether it's the Gang of 8 or the Gang of 48, because there were a lot more of us who were involved in this effort. The characters may move in and out, but I think there's a large majority in the Senate who knows that we've got to get this done. We've got to get revenues. We've got to make sure Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid are sustainable for 50, 60 years, and that we've got to do smarter cuts than we put forward in the sequester.
The entitlements, you caused some heartburn even for your fellow Democrats, and you've been willing to go further than a lot of them on entitlements. What do Democrats have to offer up there? What does the president have to sign on to that he hasn't signed on to already?
Well, I think we need to acknowledge that Medicare and Social Security are tremendously successful programs. But some of the math just doesn't work anymore. When I was a kid, there were 16 people working for every 1 person on Medicare and Social Security. Because we're living a lot longer, now it's only 3 people working for every 1 person on those entitlement programs. Within 15 years, it'll be down to 2 people working. So I think we need to look at reasonable ways where we particularly protect low-income beneficiaries, but that where you look at things like different ways of measuring consumer price index that liberal and conservative groups have agreed upon. Maybe those of us who've done well can pay a little bit more in terms of our Medicare payments. And there are a host of other ideas out there that I think reasonable people in both parties can come to agreement on.
You've been behind closed doors with Republicans. Do you think there really is any appetite out there among enough Republicans to offer more revenue up?
Well, listen, every one of the grand bargain plans that were out there that had large numbers of Republicans supporting them had between $1.2 trillion and $2 trillion of new revenue over a 10-year period. Remember, that's less than half of what was taken out when we did the so-called Bush tax cuts in 2003. So nobody's even talking to go back to the rates in the Clinton era. But we need to put about a third to a half of that revenue back in the revenue stream. 300 to 400 billion? Well, no. We did 600 billion on New Year's Eve. If everyone said the lowest amount we needed was 1.2, we've got another 600 billion or more to go. And there's 2 or 3 ways we can get at that. We can get at it, I think, the consensus around tax reform reform? How do you go ahead and go through some of the spending in the tax code, the tax expenditures, and take those down? There are, I think, increasing agreement that we've got to do something about our crumbling infrastructure. And I do think there are some other ideas. I've got some ideas that I'll lay out as well to say, how can we skin this cat if we can't get there through tax reform, where we can at least have other alternatives to generate revenue in a fair but progressive way.
A couple quick issues before I let you go. GSE reform, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. There's been a lot of rumblings about that. Do we get something done this year? You even introduced some legislation in the short term.
Yeah, I actually think we have a window on this as well. The housing market has recovered. I think the one area of financial reform that's not been touched are Fannie and Freddie. Good news is they're actually starting to make money again. Bad news is if they make too much money, there may be a sense of, oh, well, let's not mess with them anymore. We need to change the current housing finance system. And I've been working with Senator Corker. I know there are other bipartisan groups, and I think, midsummer, early fall, we could see GSE reform that will continue the housing recovery and make sure that taxpayers never again get on the hook for bad mortgage practices.
Immigration reform, you've been talking about this. You've been talking in particular about letting entrepreneurs in, immigrant entrepreneurs who might hire Americans. Where does that end up?
Well, I actually think there's a great deal of consensus around high-skill immigration. We shouldn't go ahead and train the world's best and brightest and then send them home or send them to Canada or Australia that have changed their immigration rules to let those entrepreneurs or high-skilled jobs go to those countries. I think there's still some thorny issues around guest worker programs and border security, but I think the group that's working on this is making great progress, and I give a lot of credit to a lot of Republican colleagues who've started to say, hey, for those 11 million people who are here undocumented, there needs to be a path for them to earn a path to citizenship. They got to pay taxes, they got to get to the back of the line, they got to learn English, they got to pay a fine, but there's got to be a way to rationalize those folks' legal status. So I think this is, again, an area where we actually may surprise America and get something done in a bipartisan way.
All right. Senator Warner, as always, thanks for the time. Appreciate you joining us, and enjoy the recess as well.
Thank you, Peter.
When we come back,